Hi everyone, welcome back to Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles. So today we are kicking off Oscar week with a bang, talking about Best Picture. So I'm going to go through all the movies, discuss kind of my thoughts, if I think they're going to win, if I think they have a chance, and then I'm going to go over some snubs that I feel have, happened. So that's kind of going to be the format of all of our Oscar week videos. So today, like I said, we're starting off with Best Picture, and then tomorrow we move into Best Director. After that, we're just going to do a whole episode of the performances, actors and actresses, supporting and, leading performance. Then we're going to do cinematography and editing, and then finally other production awards. I kind of try and focus my Oscar week videos, the ones I emphasize, in like areas that I feel like I can talk about strongly, because things like screenplay and things like that, I'm not like the best judge, I think, of like, what is a good screenplay versus a bad screenplay. So I kind of keep those more general. I'm pretty much, when we get to other production awards, I'm just going to kind of give my thoughts on who I think's going to win, all that stuff. But yeah, so without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump on right in, shall we? First, I'd just like to point out that two of these are getting Criterion releases, and that is The Irishman and Marriage Story. And I talked a little bit about this on the podcast before, but that's just a really interesting sign and a really good sign, because, Netflix has really struggled in the past to get, I guess, industry respect in terms of, should it be considered for an Oscar? Is it a TV movie, or is it like a cinematic movie? Where does Netflix fall? Where are Netflix films in that, camp and conversation? And to see two get, recognition from a company like Criterion, and to even, have them be on the Best Picture nominee ballot is really significant. So that's just kind of some current events before we go in. So all of the Oscar nominees are as follows. So you have Ford vs. Ferrari, The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women, Marriage Story, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Parasite. So I'm just going to kind of go back through that list and talk about, my thoughts, what I thought of each of them, all that stuff. So first, let's talk about Parasite. It's directed by Bong Joon-ho, and it is about a rich family and a poor family, and their relationship. And it's a huge, interesting class commentary. It's part of the Korean New Wave genre, I believe. And it's just an excellent film all around, honestly. I think it really elevated the class conversation for me in a really interesting, way. It also passed The Godfather as one of the highest rated movies on Letterboxd. So, that's another pretty good sign, of its quality. I think that honestly Parasite has a really good chance of Best Picture. And the reason why I say that is, one, last year there was this whole kind of kerfuffle with Roma. And Roma was put in the Best Foreign Film category as well as Best Picture, same as Parasite. And a lot of people felt it was the best of the year, but it didn't end up getting Best Picture. It got Best Foreign Film. So I have a feeling that the Academy's not going to do that a second time, and I feel like Parasite might actually take it this year. It's been doing really, really well this award season, and honestly, it's just been really well received. It's been excellent. It's an excellent movie for sure. And so I'd be really excited if it won. I think for sure, out of all of the films in this, the Best Picture docket, the Best Picture list, I wouldn't say Parasite is my personal favorite, but I think in terms of social importance and pushing the form, I think that Parasite definitely takes the cake and would, honestly, if I was an Academy voter, be my pick for Best Picture. But yeah. So let's go ahead and move along. The Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is about an actor and his stuntman and their kind of friendship as they go along. It's a very like day in the life-esque kind of film. It leads up to the night that the Manson murders took place, and they happen to live next to Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski in the movie. So it kind of like goes through until that moment, and it's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because it's a fictionalized telling of those events. So yeah, I thought Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was excellent. It is for sure one of my favorite Tarantino films. I think it was one of the best films of last year for sure. However, I do have a feeling that when we look at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it could go a couple different ways because, Tarantino saying that it's his last movie, I could see it maybe like doing a harsh sweep, but at the same time, I have a feeling that more of the production design elements, I know it's up for like costumes and, I think makeup and hair and also like, production design, things like that. And I have a feeling it's going to do really well in those categories, in like I hate to say secondary categories, but like, what we perceive as the secondary categories, and more production focused categories instead of the big five. So I have a feeling it'll really take a lot of awards home there, but I'm not necessarily sure if it's gonna get Best Picture. That's the only thing. So, yeah, I thought Once Upon a Time was excellent, and Hollywood was excellent. It has a killer soundtrack, that's for sure. But yeah, in terms of running for Best Picture, I just, thinking about it, like, I mean, it's hard because this year there are a lot of probably my three favorites. So if I were to say, I would be happy if either Parasite, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or The Irishman took Best Picture. Those are my three favorites of the year if on this Best Picture list. So those are the three that I would be super happy with if they took the home Best Picture. So yeah, I'm not trying to say that I don't personally think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood should win. I'm just saying I'm not sure the Academy's going to go that direction. So yeah. Moving on, next is 1917. Now, 1917 was a really, really interesting film. I thought it did a really good job in a similar way to Uncut Gems, which I'll talk about a little later in my snub list. I think it did a really good job of playing with storytelling and playing with audience expectations, especially, you know, audiences, like general audiences. I don't want to give anything away in terms of spoilers or anything like that, but it's a really, really interesting narrative film. It really takes you on a lot of twists and turns, and it's a really, really well done. So that's a really high point of 1917 for sure. However, I'm just not 100% sure if that's going to push it over the edge for Best Picture. I think Parasite edges it out a little bit in terms of storytelling just because of the vastly different cultural perspective that we get. But 1917, you know, the Academy historically loves, you know, World War movies, and a World War I movie is very rare, and it was a very well done film as well. So, you know, I have a feeling it might take things like cinematography. I think it's up for cinematography as well. We'll talk about that in a couple days. But yeah, 1917, I think it's a solid choice, but I have a feeling it's not going to get Best Picture. So let's go ahead and scoot along to the next one. And this next one is A Marriage Story. And I was actually really surprised this one got on the ballot. Not because it wasn't good. I thought it was an excellent film for sure. But I think it's very different from what I usually see. It's a very intimate film. It's a very, you know, it's a very intimate, non-grandiose film, I guess, if that's a way to put it. It's not a traditional, you know, Oscar nom film, I think. The highlight of A Marriage Story for me especially were the performances. So I think, you know, A Marriage Story, I don't know if they're going to get it because, you know, it's so performance heavy, and it's not necessarily something like Parasite or 1917 where it's like grandiose and it really changes, you know, how we as spectators perceive, you know, storytelling and, you know, class commentary and certain things and blah, blah, blah. It's a very, very intimate story about a relationship that a lot of people can relate to. And so I'm not necessarily sure how that'll affect its, you know, running for Best Picture. But yeah, I thought A Marriage Story was excellent for sure. We're going to talk about it a lot more in terms of the performances in a couple days. But yeah, Marriage Story is solid. So next up is Little Women. Little Women is a film by Greta Gerwig. It is a modern retelling of, you know, the Little Women novel. I've never read Little Women, so I just got to say that. But I did think the film was very well done. I know Greta Gerwig is a huge snub for Best Director, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But some things that really stood out about Little Women to me was, you know, the very realistic look at female relationships. And I think a lot of that comes from, you know, the female-driven creative side of the film, you know, and, you know, writers, directors, all that stuff. And that was a really, really stand out. Also, the performances were really well done. The performances were excellent. Saoirse Ronan was the only one who was actually nominated, but everyone else really holds the film together in this really nice ensemble cast sort of way. But you know, it's a really it's a typical period drama, for sure, but I really like the little elements of it that elevate it slightly above a lot of period films. We're actually, after Oscar week, the rest of February, we're covering a bunch of period movies, so, you know, that may come up a little later on the podcast if that's a conversation you're interested in. But yeah, I really liked Little Women. I liked how it used its platform. I liked how it showed the relationships between the women and also the women and the men, and I thought it was really well done. So yeah, I think it might, you know, if I'm looking at any of them, you know, I think Parasite, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Irishman, those are my three favorites. Those are my three picks, like I said. But if we're going on like a fourth, and a fourth that might get it is Little Women. Also, moving on to the next one, that's Joker. Joker has had a lot of hype this year. It has a lot of nominations this year. And so, like, it might honestly take Best Picture. I personally wouldn't be, you know, I mean, honestly, it's just an Oscar. It's not going to be live or die. I'm not going to live or die by if it does or doesn't get Best Picture. But just something that made me not necessarily make it my top pick for Best Picture was I'm a huge diehard Scorsese fan, right? So I do have a lot of biases going in, but I felt like Joker was just, if I'm looking at Best Picture, I'm making the decision on what I want to nominate as Best Picture, or what I think Best Picture should be based on how it pushes the form, right? How it pushes the form of filmmaking. That's at least how I look at it. I don't necessarily know, like, you know, I'm not going to get into politics of, like, does the Academy do that every time? Does the Academy vote for that every time? I really, you know, I could care less. That's just personally how I look at it, you know what I mean? So when I'm looking at Joker in that assessment, I just think it's a little too much of homage of Scorsese to be, you know, something that deserves Best Picture and really pushes the form of movie making. I think for sure it makes some topics more accessible to modern audiences who maybe aren't going to go seek out old Scorsese movies, but I don't think that makes it a contender for Best Picture, at least in my eyes. Now, the two Scorsese movies in particular that I'm referencing, a lot of people have been saying Taxi Driver, which for sure, it has a bunch of shot-for-shot Taxi Driver, and, you know, a lot of the characterizations are Taxi Driver-esque as well. But then the second thing about it is very King of Comedy from Scorsese. That's another one that kind of slips under the radar in terms of Scorsese's work, but that's another film that Joker strongly homaged that, like, you know, it wasn't a bad thing. Joker was a well-done movie. It just, those decisions made me feel like it wasn't quite Best Picture worthy, if that makes sense. So yeah, Joaquin Phoenix's performance, though, super solid, super good. So I'm just going to go ahead and scoot on to the next one, and that is Jojo Rabbit. Now, I really wanted to like Jojo Rabbit, right? I gave it, like, I think 3.5 stars on Letterboxd, because I just had some difficulty, like, at a certain amount of time, like, at a certain point, I just, like, the Hitler jokes for me just got a little old. It got a little repetitive too much, and I felt like the arcs could have been a little bit stronger, and that they could have, you know, the arcs with Hitler's character as well as the arc with the mother and the boy and their relationship, I felt like they could have felt a lot more extreme over the course of the movie. So for me in particular, I just felt like it wasn't as effective of a movie. It wasn't as strong of a movie. So I have a feeling this one might just kind of slip under the radar. I also don't see a lot of people, like, talking about it in terms of Best Picture. So yeah. Scarlett Johansson, though, is nominated for Best Supporting Performance in this one, or Marriage Story. I may be getting those mixed up, but we'll talk about ScarJo's 2 nominations in a couple days. But yeah, Jojo Rabbit, I think, is just going to kind of fall in the middle. I would be kind of surprised if it got Best Picture, but I mean, you know, it wasn't a bad, horrible movie. It was pretty well done. Just for me, it got a little old. The jokes got repetitive. So then moving on to one of my favorites of the year. Oh my God, The Irishman. Wow, what an excellent movie, am I right? I also have a feeling The Irishman might honestly take it. It was such an excellent movie. It was so well done. It was so well rounded. Like, I thought it was, you know, some of Scorsese's best work. Kind of similar to Tarantino. You know, Tarantino and Scorsese are both putting out some of their best movies, honestly, this year. So yeah, The Irishman just... It's an excellent pick, and I think it would 100% deserve it. I think taking the gangster film, pushing it into the epic form, making a really long movie that feels like it's long for a reason, you know, because of the epic format of it, in theaters in these days is really, really interesting. Also looking at it as a Netflix movie, and giving validity to Netflix movies as, like, not just TV movies, as something that's a little bit more cinematic, not to invalidate TV movies, but I think The Irishman was a really, really good pick and a really, really good contender, and I think it could honestly take it for Best Picture. And then finally, we have Ford versus Ferrari. For me, Ford versus Ferrari kind of, like, fell in the middle for me. Out of all of the Best Picture nominees, it was probably just, like, you know, it was probably my least favorite of all the Best Picture nominees. It was okay. It was pretty good. It was just, like, a story I didn't really, you know, relate to very heavily. I did think, you know, the cinematography was very interesting, and I think some of the storytelling elements were very good, but I wouldn't necessarily place it as my pick for Best Picture, and I have a feeling it's not going to get it this year. If it does, good for it. That's a bit cool. Go Ford versus Ferrari. But yeah, I would say it's not necessarily... It's not my pick. Hashtag not my pick for Best Picture. Hashtag not my Best Picture. But yeah, So for those of you out there who don't know, in about 2008, I believe it was, there were 5 slots that were allotted for Best Picture. So 5 films out of all the films the Academy voted on were allowed to be officially nominated for Best Picture. And in 2008, at the 82nd or 83rd Academy Awards, it switched to 10 nominations being allowed on the ballot for Best Picture. So that just increased how many films were able to be on the ticket. So looking at this year, there are 9 submissions for Best Picture. So that means there is 1 slot that just was not filled. I'm not quite sure the process of why, it doesn't just go automatically up to 10. I'm sure, you could find that answer pretty quickly online, but I'm not personally sure of why. So there was a spot open for, some movies, and these are movies that I would put in that slot is what I'm saying. So let me just go down the list. 1, I'm very, very sad that The Lighthouse did not get nominated for Best Picture. The Lighthouse was probably the one that, if I could add one in, I'd add in The Lighthouse. For reasons why, I thought The Lighthouse pushed the form in an excellent way. I also thought The Lighthouse was a really, really, really good, I just thought it was a really good film. I thought it was a good fetish film. I thought it was very interesting. I thought the performances were excellent. But I thought for sure it was Best Picture material. Apparently I was wrong, but okay. Another one that I might put on the ticket, that I would have voted for is Uncut Gems. I think Uncut Gems really, really pushed the form of storytelling with how they utilized actors, how they played with the audience in a very similar way to 1917. I'm not going to say that those two kind of edged each other out, but I am really surprised that Uncut Gems did not get on the ballot. Yeah. Lighthouse, I kind of understand, the Academy sometimes just leaves out genre film, and they don't really, if it's a horror film or a fantasy film or things like that, they kind of just leave it out of the awards, or at least, traditionally they leave it out of the awards. So yeah, looking at it, I would have put Uncut Gems. I was really surprised, honestly. So yeah. Next up, The Two Popes, I was kind of surprised did not get nominated as well. It got 2 performance awards, for the 2, titular roles. So, that makes sense. But I have a feeling that A Marriage Story kind of in terms of intimate storytelling, I feel like, A Marriage Story kind of took the place that The Two Popes probably would have taken. So that's probably why it did not get nominated. I'm also a little surprised. So yeah, Lighthouse I would put on the ballot. Uncut Gems I would put on the ballot. The Two Popes I was just surprised. I'm not necessarily sure if I would or wouldn't put it on the ballot, but I was just kind of surprised. I was also surprised with Hustlers. I thought Hustlers was a really excellent film that, could have gotten Academy approval pretty quickly. But, J-Lo did not get nominated. The movie did not get nominated. But it's still an excellent female-led gangster film, so I would highly recommend it. I was also kind of surprised on Knives Out as well. I thought Knives Out might have had a chance for a bit. It did a really, really good job in terms of box office. And I like the ensembleness of it. I like, the mystery format. But I think it might have fallen a little bit too genre film for Academy voters maybe. So, yeah. Knives Out. So then, those were the other couple ones that I was surprised did not get on the ballot. I'm not going to say stuff like Richard Jewell, because, I think Richard Jewell is a little too Oscar baity to be, a snub. And then also Bombshell, I wouldn't have necessarily put Bombshell on the Best Picture ballot, but I do completely agree with, the performance nominations for sure. But yes. Also, okay, another one, I guess I'll just add on is Midsommar, but like I said before, Midsommar is super niche genre film, and so I don't necessarily see the Academy voters putting those movies in unless there's maybe another change in the Academy, or unless, the Academy kind of becomes more open to more genre movies, more independent stuff. I think the Academy is kind of trying to figure out its new identity still. Ever since Oscar So White happened, I could kind of see this kind of new era of the Academy for sure. And you could see a notable difference in who is nominated and who is voted for, but, it's still kind of trying to figure itself out. Because even this year, there was a lot of work, like I said, that was female-led, female-directed, that was kind of went under the radar for, no real reason that I can see. But also, there was not a lot of people of color nominated. Another snub a lot of people brought up was Us by Jordan Peele. And yeah, I completely agree. But also, Us is a horror film, and, generally speaking, the Academy doesn't necessarily always vote for horror films. But yeah. This year for sure is not as bad as the Oscar So White year, but I will say that there is still a marked difference in people of color as well as, women-led projects getting the same attention for, a reason I can't quite perceive. I'm not quite sure, because like things like Hustlers, it's excellent, it's very well done, and I'm not sure why it did not get awards. Or like, things like Little Women, I'm not quite sure why Greta Gerwig just didn't get nominated. So we'll look at that when we kind of go into the next couple of episodes. But another film for Best Picture that a lot of people felt was a snub, but I think kind of falls into the horror film rule more than anything, was Us by Jordan Peele. And I would highly recommend Us, but yeah, I think it kind of slipped under the radar for Academy voters because of its hyper genre nature. But yeah, that's just my opinion from an outsider's perspective. When I get into the Academy, I'll give you all the 411, but for now, we're just all on the outside looking in. But thank you all so much for watching. Those were my best thoughts on the Best Picture nominees. Those were also my thoughts on some of the snubs, some of the, history of Best Picture, all that stuff. But thank you all. Tomorrow you can join me to get thoughts on Best Director. Directing is my particular point of emphasis when I make movies and when I study movies. I love directing. So I'm really excited to talk about that. But yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think about the Best Picture nominees. You can reach out to me, particularly at _RenaissanceWoman on Instagram, or you can reach out to the podcast, Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles, and just give me your thoughts there. I'm really, really excited to hear what you think. Do you think that Ford versus Ferrari should take it? Let me know. But thank you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye. Mwah.